Spread out throughout Chicagoland are millions of homes of all shapes and sizes. These homes have been the dwellings of the people who have built Chicago and are as diverse as the population that makes up the city. This video is a bike tour of 10 of the most famous houses in all of Chicagoland. These houses range from the architecturally significant to the large and extravagant, and to the modest type, that are famous for the prior inhabitants. These 10 houses are as varied as the overall housing stock, so sit back and consider this list of the 10 most famous houses in Chicago. And feel free to comment below if you think I missed a house that should be included as one of the 10 most famous houses in Chicago.
Today I'm at the Frank Lloyd Wright Home and Studio in Oak Park, Illinois. And we're going on a tour of 10 of the most famous houses in Chicago. Frank Lloyd Wright lived here, worked here, and raised a family here. So it's a great place to start, in my hometown of Oak Park, Illinois.
The tour begins in Oak Park, Illinois, which is known for having the greatest concentration of Frank Lloyd Wright designed homes in the world. Frank Lloyd Wright lived in Oak Park between 1889 and 1909. He finished his home and studio in 1889 when just 22 years old, going on to raise 6 children in the home with his wife Catherine. The house served as a prototype for many of Wright's future designs, and it was his studio in the formative years as an architect while in his 20s and 30s. Wright moved out of the home in 1909 when he departed to live a life with the wife of a former client. The home fell into significant disrepair by the 1970s when it was being used as low-end apartments. Fortunately, the Frank Lloyd Wright Trust purchased and restored the home, and it has been open for tours in the 45-plus years since. In addition to the Frank Lloyd Wright home and studio, Oak Park contains over 24 Wright-designed homes and countless Prairie-style homes designed by Wright protégés, including John Van Bergen, Charles White, and William Drummond. Oak Park also contains both the birth home and the boyhood home of Ernest Hemingway. Hemingway was born in Oak Park in 1899, and his family moved to a nearby home 6 years later. He was raised in this home, attending Oak Park and River Forest High School, and returned to it after serving in World War I. Oak Park is also home where renowned chemist Percy Julian lived with his family between 1950 and 1975. The second home on the tour is also the northernmost home of the top 10. This 50,000-plus square foot home was built in 1995 by Chicago Bulls legend Michael Jordan. He raised his 3 children at the home and lived here during the second Chicago Bulls three-peat in the late 1990s.
Jordan, open, Chicago with the lead!
The sprawling estate features a full-sized indoor basketball court, a tennis court, and a putting green. Jordan lived in the house until 2012 when he put the home on the market for $29 million. The home would go on to sit on the market for over 12 years until finally selling for $9.5 million in December 2024. The estate is now available for rent on Airbnb for over $10,000 per night, allowing guests the opportunity to enter beyond the number 23 gates and experience how Michael Jordan lived during his most famous years.
Nothing says Chicago like the numbers 23. As you'd guess, this is Michael Jordan's estate. He built it in, I think, 1995. Lived here until about 2012 when he listed it for sale, I think over $20 million. And he sold it for less than 10 just last December 2024. The new owners, they're making it an Airbnb, so you could rent it by the night for a month. Hang out like MJ.
Perhaps the most unremarkable home on the tour, yet still famous, lies 5 miles to the south of Jordan's house in nearby Deerfield. This split-level home was unveiled to the world in 1987 when featured in the intro to the show Married with Children.
You can't have one without the other.
While the actual show was filmed on a soundstage in California, the exterior shot of the Deerfield residence was the image for the home in which Al and Peg Bundy raised their 2 children. The home was built in about 1970 and is a typical split-level ranch house in a subdivision. It maintains the same appearance as what is shown in the intro to each episode of Married with Children.
This is the Bundy house from Married with Children. They didn't film anything here. It was just in the opening credits. I was in Poland in 1997 and 1998, and my students, they loved Married with Children, and they always asked me if I had been to the Bundy house. I hadn't. But here, 27 years later, I've been to the Bundy House.
On the other end of the spectrum, from the modest Married with Children home, is the newest home on this list, which is currently being built and may just be the largest and most extravagant home in Chicagoland when completed. Justin Ishbia is the billionaire owner of the Phoenix Suns and likely future owner of the Chicago White Sox. In 2020 and 2022, Ishbia purchased 4 contiguous lots along Sheridan Road in Winnetka. All were luxury homes overlooking Lake Michigan, and Ishbia gained approval to tear them all down in order to clear the way for his 68,000 square foot estate. The project has involved major site preparation, including the reconstruction of a 200-plus foot bluff overlooking Lake Michigan. The site spans nearly 4 acres and has a cost estimated at over $75 million.
Behind me is the future home of Justin Ishbia. He's building it right now for roughly $80 million, causing a lot of controversy within the community about its size and location. And like it or not, it's one of a kind. Probably the largest and most extravagant home in Chicago.
While not quite as large and extravagant, the most famous house in Winnetka was the home of the McAllister family in the 1990 holiday classic, Home Alone. This Georgian colonial revival-style home was built in the 1920s and was selected by director Chris Columbus because it contained the necessary elements that could showcase the showdown between Kevin McAllister and the Wet Bandits. While most interior scenes were shot on a soundstage in California, the home was featured for exterior scenes and some scenes that included interior shots. The current exterior of the 9,000 square foot home is remarkably similar to the appearance in the film. However, the interior received an extensive renovation in 2018. The 1990s decor seen in the film have given way to a modern interior with white finishes. Additionally, spaces have been added that were not enjoyed by Kevin and the rest of the McAllister family.
The house that needs no introduction, the McAllister house from Home Alone. Looks like they're doing some work, but beyond that, it looks pretty similar to what it did when Kevin lived there, when he was left alone there.
The next home on the tour lies in the Gold Coast of Chicago and was once owned by Hugh Hefner and was the original Playboy Mansion. Hugh Hefner was born in the Galwood neighborhood in 1926. He lived in a modest home on New England Avenue for the first 2 decades of his life and attended nearby Sayre Elementary School. In December 1953, when Hefner was 27 years old, he published the first issue of Playboy, which featured nude photos of Marilyn Monroe. The success enabled Hefner to purchase the 54-room mansion at 1340 North State Parkway for $400,000 in 1959. Hefner would live at the mansion for 15 years and made it the headquarters for Playboy Enterprises. It was the grounds for lavish parties during that span and frequented by many of the Playboy bunnies that appeared in the early issues of the iconic magazine. Hefner moved the company to Los Angeles in 1974 and gave up ownership of the original Playboy Mansion at that time. The Playboy Mansion reconstituted itself in Los Angeles, and the Chicago residents would become condos.
In the early 1960s, this was the place to be, the original Playboy Mansion. Hugh Hefner, he grew up in Chicago, and this was his first place where he got his enterprise rolling.
On the south side of Chicago sits another mansion owned by one of the most famous Chicagoans of all time. However, this one has been used for a more wholesome purpose. This home at 5046 South Greenwood was purchased by Barack and Michelle Obama in 2005 for $1.65 million. Obama was elected to the United States Senate in 2004, and the home on Greenwood Avenue would be the place where they raised their 2 young daughters. However, their time in the home would last only 3 years, as Obama was elected to the presidency in 2008, and they would subsequently move to the White House in January 2009. The Obamas remained in Washington, D.C. after the 2 terms as president, yet they have maintained ownership of the 6,000-plus square foot home. While they only stay there while in town, the house has 24-hour Secret Service protection, and traffic on the block is limited to residents.
I'm in front of the home of the Obamas. They bought it in 2005 for, I think, like $1.6 million after Barack was elected to the United States Senate. 3 years later, he would become president, and in the time since, they haven't lived here much. They still own it, and it has Secret Service protection. You can see the signs out in front. I don't see the Secret Service right now, but I think they're here, guarding it at all times, especially when the Obamas are in town.
Nearby the Obamas and across the street from the University of Chicago campus sits Frank Lloyd Wright's Robie House. This home was commissioned in 1908 by leather pioneer Frederick C. Robie. It was completed in 1910, and Robie would only live there with his family of 4 for 2 years. The home contains a mix of elegant public spaces with secluded private spaces. It was a private residence until the 1970s, when the Frank Lloyd Wright Trust acquired the property and opened it up to public tours. The home was immortalized in 2011 when LEGO released a model of the home in what is now a highly sought-after set.
One thing I find most interesting about Wright houses is the front door is always kind of hidden. It's not really in the center of the house where the first thing you see. It's always kind of tucked away behind a wall, not obvious where you actually enter the house. And that's really obvious in the Robie house. The other thing, they use brick that's a little bit not as tall. So it really accentuates the architectural, like the vertical lines of the house, of the horizon. And it even goes so far as the mortar. It's got like a white color on the horizontal lines, but the vertical colors of the mortar are the same as the brick. So you really only see the horizontal lines of the brick, which is kind of a cool little feature. So.
Traveling into the south side of Chicago brings this tour to 7244 South Prairie Avenue, a brick, 2-flat home that served as the primary residence of Al Capone during his rise to notoriety. Capone moved to Chicago in 1990 at the age of 20, and shortly thereafter bought the home on Prairie Avenue for about $15,000. He lived there with his wife May, their son Sonny, his sister, and his mother. The nondescript home allowed Capone to maintain a low profile while serving as the boss of the Chicago outfit. It was also located near Cicero, where Capone based much of his operation. Capone would live in the house until 1931, when he was sentenced to 11 years in prison on the count of tax evasion. He was released from prison in 1939 due to failing health and moved to his Miami Beach estate, where he would live until his death in 1947. The Capone family owned the home until the 1950s, and it was most recently sold for $226,000 in 2019.
So this is the house of Scarface, Alphonse Capone. He moved here in the 1920s from New York in his 20s. So that's a way to think about it. Lived here in the 20s, in his 20s. Came to prominence while in this home. I think he ran on most of his business out of Cicero. The politicians, the policemen were easy to control over there. So this is on the south side of Chicago. So he did his business a little bit west of here.
The final home on this tour is in South suburban Dalton and is the most recently famous home in Chicagoland. This is the child home of Pope Leo XIV. The modest one-story brick house was built in 1949, and the first owners were the Prevost family. The family had 3 children, including Robert, who was born in 1955. Robert would grow up in the home until he went to seminary school in 1969. The home rose to prominence in May of 2025 when Robert was elected as the first American-born pope. The house had recently been renovated and was on the market for $200,000 when Robert was elected pope. However, the listing was canceled and subsequently sold to the city of Dalton for $375,000. The city of Dalton is finalizing plans to open the home to visitors and have it serve as a pilgrimage site.
I'm at the boyhood home of Pope Leo in Dalton, Illinois. The city bought this after he became pope, and now they're developing it into something you could visit, perhaps tour. So yeah, I like the fact that they're embracing their newfound fame.
That concludes my list of the 10 most famous homes in Chicago. There are countless more that can stake a claim to be included on a list like this. Feel free to comment below on ones that you feel should be included, and I hope this video inspires you to get on your bike and check out some famous homes in Chicago.